The Big 12 released its preseason poll, and as expected, BYU is near the bottom of the preseason rankings. Is that actually an advantageous spot for Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars? We're talking about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. And the Big 12 got ahead of it this year. They officially released the preseason media poll, and as expected, BYU near the bottom of the newly configured Big 12 conference. 16 teams in the league, and BYU's not at the very bottom of the league, but they are checking in at number 13 in this preseason poll. Now, you come off a 5-7 season, you have a 5-game losing streak. I completely understand why things stand the way that they stand for BYU, because frankly, this is a program that's got a lot to prove. I think that Kalani Sitake, Aaron Roderick, Jay Hill, any of those coaches inside the BYU football program, if you were to give them some truth serum and say, where would you like BYU to be picked going into the season? They'd tell you they'd like to have them in a position similar to what they're at. It gives them every opportunity to surprise people. People are going to look at BYU and say, okay, they're picked 13th out of 16 teams, and they're not expected to accomplish much here. The only teams worse than BYU, funny enough, are two of their fellow newcomers to the conference last year in Cincinnati and Houston, and then bringing up the rear are the Arizona State Sun Devils. So those are teams that BYU is in theory going to have to outpace. But the other thing about this is look at the teams directly in front of BYU. Baylor, Colorado, TCU. Those are all teams I think BYU believes that they can surpass this season. And I say that because having conversations with the BYU football program, talking with individuals inside the program, is that they are feeling quite confident in their ability to bounce back from a lackluster season a year ago and get back to the bowl season. Now, does that mean they improve by just one game and get to 6-6 this season? That very well may be the case. But if you look at BYU's overall strength of schedule this year, a 6-6 record this year, I think would absolutely outclass by a big margin last year's record of 5-7. I think BYU is in a great spot, quite frankly, to go out and be able to, quote unquote, shock the world as it is where they're picked in this preseason poll. Yes, BYU has aspirations to move towards the top of the conference. Their arch rival, Utah, year one in the Big 12 conference, they're the preseason favorite. Utah garnered 21st place votes, 906 overall points, outclassing Kansas State by one first place vote, and then Oklahoma State with 14. They're the only teams, those three, with double-digit first place votes. The other first place votes went out to Kansas and Arizona. And then it doled out from there. BYU, I think, is going to sit there and say, okay, we want to get to that level. We want to be a program that can have aspirations and expectations of being a top tier, if not the top team in the Big 12. It's going to take some time. That's the other thing I will caution Cougar fans. Don't get too upset the fact that Utah's picked as a preseason favorite coming into this conference. Quite frankly, I just speaking generally, I think Utah's got a major target on their back, and they're not 100% certain what they're going up against. It's a new conference. Obviously, they've had a very, very good run in the Pac-12, but they're coming into the Big 12, and there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to new conference mates, new conference foes, and getting used to all of that. So Utah, they're going to have a lot of expectation heaped upon their shoulders, whereas almost on the opposite end of the spectrum, BYU's got little to no expectation on their shoulders. It's a great spot for BYU to build from right now. Like I said, BYU is going to be lightly thought of by a number of their opponents going into the season. A lot of media members and the like are overlooking what BYU's done. And I think that, frankly, the Cougars are ready to go out and really get after it. Obviously, they've got to be able to prove that on the field. Whether it's Jake Retzloff or Gary Bohannon as your starting quarterback, they have got to step up and deliver. They got to be able to distribute the ball effectively to their playmakers on the perimeter at wide receiver and at tight end. Also get the ball into the hands of guys like LJ Martin at running back and allow the playmakers for BYU to go out there and lead them to victory. The other thing is they got to avoid critical errors. You can't have 100-yard pick sixes, back-breaking plays like Jake Retzloff had against Oklahoma last season. If you can get, I think, solid, if not a spectacular BYU quarterback play this year, I think it would go a long way to BYU surpassing the expectations, checking at number 13 in this preseason poll. I'm not saying that BYU is going to jump up from 13 and all of a sudden be in the top 3 of this conference. That'd be an absolutely miracle season. And funny enough, Kelly Ford, who does a lot of prognostications on college football, has his own metrics of how he measures things. He actually indicated that if BYU, and I know this is like a pipe dream of pipe dreams, it feels like, but if BYU, based on the strength of schedule he's projecting for them, they were to win 10 games. Yes, they go 10-2 in the regular season. He believes that they would be in playoff conversations. That'd be absolutely remarkable if BYU were able to accomplish that. But I think that would blow every expectation of anyone watching and or listening to this podcast, including myself, for BYU to accomplish that. But the bigger point to be made here is BYU's in a good spot. They're going to come into the season full of piss and vinegar, and they're going to want to go out and prove themselves. They are not content with what happened a year ago. If you guys saw the mic'd up segments with the BYU strength staff that they put out on social media recently for BYU football, their coaching staffs tell them, you want to go 5-7, keep doing that. The thing about this is they are getting it drilled into them that that's what people think you are. They think you are a 5-7 team, a team that faded hard down the stretch of last season with a 5-game losing streak. BYU was 5-2 at one point last year, and that very much looked the part of a team that was going to get to a bowl in their first season in the conference. And then they suffered the ignominy of losing 5 straight games to end that campaign. It's been drilled into their head time and time again, coming from the strength staff, coming from the lay fan on social media, coming from their own coaches. They have been pounding into these guys. You want to be a 5-7 team? Keep doing what you're doing. You want to improve? You want to get to 6-6, 7-5? You want to improve that record? Year 2 in the Big 12? You got to go out and put the time in, put the effort in to prove that you want it. And across the board, everything that I'm hearing about BYU is that they are sick of hearing about 5-7. That might be the rallying cry for this team this year, is 5-7 to obviously get it in their head that they're trying to surpass that and make sure that doesn't happen again under Kalani Sitake. But ultimately, the proof will be out there on the gridiron when BYU takes the field. And I, for one, I am super excited. I don't know if you guys saw it last night. They officially announced they're going to have those LED lights inside Lavelle Edwards Stadium. We're going to have some fun with the lighting when it comes to the third quarter break and introductions and the like. It's awesome. Awesome aesthetics to have that in Lavelle Edwards Stadium. But the real big thing that everybody seems to care about more than anything else, and you can argue with me if you want, but quite frankly, I don't care because I think I've got this one nailed down, is you care about your team, in this case, BYU, at the end of those 60 minutes, having more points than the other team, whether it's by 2, whether it's by 30. You simply put, you want BYU to win. And if BYU does that this season, they're going to put to bed, I think, a lot of the angst that Cougar fans have had. They're going to have to go out and there and prove it. The players make the plays. The coaches call the plays. Kalani Sitake is trying to keep it moving in the right direction all across the board as the CEO, for lack of a better term, of this program. And there's a lot of moving parts. But if BYU can get in better sync this year than they were a year ago, I think there is a very, very real possibility that BYU will surpass that number 13 projection in the Big 12 this season. Could they live up to the middle part of the table, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, where West Virginia, UCF, and Texas Tech are currently projected? I think that would be a pretty good spot to ultimately come out on. If you surpass all expectations, and like I said, Kelly Ford believes if you had 10 wins, you're 10-2, you'll be in the playoff fixture. Okay, that's something to aspire to as well, but it's baby steps at times. You can't ultimately go out there and become a 12-0 team overnight. It's going to take some time for BYU to build up that caliber of a roster, that caliber of a program. But this year, this coming year, year 2 in the Big 12 Conference, could go a long way towards laying the framework and the baseline, the foundation whatever adjective I'm trying to utilize here, for BYU to build upon in future seasons. And I think it's very important that BYU does that very thing this fall. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk about the first team all Big 12 honorees. Only one Cougar on that list. Were any other Cougars spurned? In my mind, we'll dig into that next as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys, no matter what you're into, whether you're into sports, music, theater, no matter what it is, Game Time has got options for you guys to get out to the events you want to go to. It's an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. A lot of us during the summer months want to go watch baseball at the ballparks. Well, the best part is they're making getting tickets faster and easier, and the best part is prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. Think about that. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and a lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying your MLB tickets, and they're doing it for you guys every single day. The best part about it is also you can go on the app, you customize your spot, and you can check all the different features out on the app to make sure that your experience at the Major League Baseball ballpark of your choosing is the best experience you can experience. Last minute tickets, they got flash deals, zone deals. They've got every type of deal under the sun. They want to essentially make it as simple as possible, but also allow you to have the time of your life at the event, in this case, a Major League Baseball game. But once again, anything else you're looking forward to going to. And the best part is you also can save up to 60% by buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and other events from our friends at Game Time. So download Game Time today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you guys are watching all the other networks out there, Fox Sports, ESPN on your TV all day long and haven't turned on the volume with all the shouting going on as they quote-unquote embrace debate, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, my friends. And the best part is it's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day with the biggest stories, all without all the screaming going on like it is on the other networks. It has the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube. It's also available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, BYU obviously picked 13th in the preseason poll. The big question was, okay, how many guys will be on the preseason all Big 12 team coming into the season where they're not necessarily as high in the media poll? Well, the number is one. The only member of the BYU football program to make the preseason all Big 12 team is the man, the myth, the legend, Tyler Batty. Now, he's a second team honoree last year as he got 5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, really had a solid season. But the hope is, as he goes into what is expected to be his final season as a Cougar, that he saves the absolute best for last. And if he does, if he goes out there and gets double-digit sacks for BYU this season and really proves that he is what BYU's hoped he could be since the 2020 season when he made his debut, BYU will benefit immensely, honestly, on their defense by having Tyler Batty as an edge rusher. They need to generate more pressure on the quarterback. And I know Tyler Batty is fully aware of it because he probably hears it from everybody, including his own family, every single day when it comes to the BYU defense. Jay Hill is absolutely intent on making sure that BYU is able to create havoc in the backfield for opposing quarterbacks. He cannot stand the fact that a quarterback of yesteryear for BYU will be able to sit back there for 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds and just pick apart BYU secondary, because there's only so long that even the most elite cornerbacks, safeties, and linebackers are going to be able to stay in coverage with the guys they're assigned to. You have to be able to make that quarterback make a quick decision, get that ball out of his hands, and hopefully he makes a poor decision and makes a poor throw, and you benefit from it. Or you also get the sack, strip it out, get the turnover, make all those big plays. They like to use the term havoc, and that's exactly what it is. You want to make it so quarterbacks on the opposing team, when they step onto the field, they're not sure where the pressure is coming from, but they fully expect there's going to be pressure in their face in the 2 or 3 seconds after that ball is snapped. Tyler Batty is going to have a huge role in that overall success or lack thereof this season for BYU. And it's been the same way for him, like I said, dating back all the way to the 2020 season when he was a freshman that came in during that COVID year and it was a revelation. It felt like, wow, the future is unlimited for this young man. And there's still a very, very big part, I believe, of his potential that he has not reached yet. And if he can reach that this year, he will absolutely remain on that first team ballot at the end of the season as well, and also could be challenged potentially for some All-American type honors as well. Similar to what I just talked about the BYU football program, is you got to go out there and prove it. Tyler Batty's got to step out there every single game and absolutely get after it. Now, he's also been a guy who's been a subject of a number of double and triple teams during his time at BYU because other defensive linemen and the other guys playing alongside him have not been able to hold up their end of the bargain. The hope is that this year, BYU has recruited enough guys on the interior and also on the opposite side of him at defensive end that BYU can generate pass rush with 4 guys, thereby giving Tyler Batty more opportunities to win one-on-one battles. We saw, I think, the biggest game for him last year was probably that Arkansas game. Remember, Arkansas thought they could block him one-on-one for long stretches of that game, and he made them pay for it. If BYU can find a way to free up Tyler Batty to have more one-on-one opportunities with opposing offensive tackles, I'm going to bet that he's going to win more often than not, and he's going to make the havoc or create the havoc that BYU wants in the opposing backfield. Yes, sacks are a big part of it, but stripping that ball out, just overall getting a hurry and making that quarterback feel rattled in the pocket, those are very, very effective things and critical benchmarks for any and all success that BYU's defense under Jay Hill is going to have as their defensive coordinator. He knows the value of having an elite pass rush. He experienced it during his playing days. He's experienced it during his coaching era. And he obviously knows what it's going to take for BYU to hold up against this competition in the Big 12. And it's really cool to see Tyler Batty getting that honor as a preseason first-team honoree. But I would love nothing more than for 3 or 4 other guys from BYU to go out there and prove themselves on the biggest stage and earn all Big 12 honors. Think of guys like a Darius Lassiter. I'm very, very excited to see what Darius Lassiter can offer to BYU, and the fact that he's going to Big 12 Media Days, I think, is a mark of honor for him, and it should be as such in his mind, because that's really cool to see that. But if he has a breakout year, could he challenge for all Big 12 honors? I think also on the defense side of things, could Jack Kelly come in and be the revelation that really BYU fans are hoping he is at that linebacker spot? He was the Kyle Van Noy of Weber State a year ago. Can he replicate that in some small part for BYU on defense? I think he can end up as an all Big 12 honoree. I think Jacob Robinson, also at cornerback for BYU, has got all Big 12 potential in him as well. The biggest thing for him is he's the big play waiting to happen. He needs to obviously focus on being a more consistent player. On the offensive line, I'm sure Connor Pay, and we're going to have him on the podcast next week to recap Big 12 Media Days. I'm sure that he would love nothing more than to finish off his BYU career with an all-conference citation as he goes on into the NFL after this season. Any of these guys, I just mentioned a handful of guys, but it feels like there's a bevy of other dudes out there that could accomplish that feat. Any and all of them that accomplish that, that's only going to make BYU that much better and give them a higher opportunity to win at a higher clip year 2 in the Big 12 Conference. Too often last year, there were individual players who stood out, and Tyler Batty's absolutely one of these guys where they were very, very good. The problem was the guys around them, whether it was some defensive tackle miscues on the interior, BYU's inability to hold up in coverage. It really affected guys like Tyler Batty, even though they were really, really talented players. So the biggest thing this year for BYU, both offensively and defensively, is be in sync. Have all 11 guys on the field at the same time, understand what they're capable of accomplishing, and have them go out there and more often than not accomplish the objectives they have. In the case of a guy like Tyler Batty, it's to create havoc in the backfield and hold up against the run. If you're moving to a guy like Jack Kelly, well, he's obviously got to back up the defensive line with run support, but also his ability to be a playmaker, strip the ball out, intercept the ball, cover guys in pass sets, and make life miserable for opposing teams. That's big. Any one of these guys, and I'm talking about defense here, but it also goes to the offense. Like I said, C. Pay at center, Darius Lassiter at wide receiver. Heck, a guy like Jake Retzloff at quarterback. They can go out there and absolutely light the world on fire, to use that figure of expression. BYU is going to benefit because they need guys to step up. They need stars to emerge for this BYU football program. 1 or 2 of them, I think, could yield 1 or 2 more wins for BYU, quite honestly. 3, 4, 5 guys emerge, well, then you're talking 3 or 4 win improvement. That's the funny thing about this is we talk all the time about it being an 11-man game. It is an 11-man game. One guy can obviously screw things up for the rest of his teammates on any given play, but if you have some true difference makers, I use the term stars, but they're difference makers out there on the field. You have 3 or 4 of those guys on the field and you have them at different levels of your offense or defense. That's going to give you a huge, huge opportunity to win the play in and play out battles that ultimately chalk up to wins and losses in the win column or in the overall record. So I look forward to this, and I appreciate the fact that Tyler Batty got that nod because I think he's the most deserving of that in terms of the preseason. But if I'm any one of his teammates, I'm talking any one of them, whether you're a freshman all the way up to a super senior, like a guy like Tyler Batty is, I would be miffed thinking, okay, I'm going to go out there and prove to the Big 12 I'm capable of competing at an all Big 12 all Big 12 level, and hopeful that honors will follow, obviously, if you perform to that level. There's a lot of hype, a lot of substance around this BYU football program. I understand that. But the bigger point to be made here is, yes, there's always going to be hype. There's always going to be the hope springs eternal when it comes to fandom. As you as Cougar fans out there in Cougar Nation, you want your Cougars to succeed. The biggest thing that's going to help them have that success is having difference makers and stars like Tyler Batty step to the forefront, really shoulder all of that hype, all that expectation, and say, follow me, boys, and let them their teammates allow them to just essentially do their thing. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm excited for this football season. I'm always excited for college football. Any of you who've known me for any length of time know that I'm a college football junkie. I am quite literally counting down the days till the new EA Sports College Football 25 is released. I cannot wait to play that. I got the early download. I think is that 13 days away, if I'm not mistaken, from being able to download that and play it. But I am super excited for the upcoming football season, and I am hopeful that BYU will go out there and once again surpass all expectations and prove themselves on the stage that they have in the Big 12 Conference. All right, we'll finish up today's show with your questions. Obviously, big week, obviously, with the holiday. My schedule on Friday could be a little bit screwy, so we may ultimately skip our Friday edition of the podcast and just enjoy the long holiday weekend. Still working out some things, but in the meantime, want to let you guys hear from yourselves, for lack of a better term, as we get into a Locked On Cougars Insider Group Q&A session. We'll wrap up the show with that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of your guys' support. I would appreciate you guys, if you've not done so already, sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. We're going to get into their questions here momentarily. And if you guys would like to have a way to ask questions in those insider groups, join us on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. And the best part about it is I kind of think I just screwed up the phrasing on that. But the bigger point to be made here is it's a great way to get updates from me every single day when I'm sending out text messages, filling you in on what I'm hearing about BYU sports, basketball, football, and everything in between. And if you want to get kind of a trial period on it, you have 14 days to see if it's the right option for you. So sign up today, use the link in the show notes, whether you're watching and or listening to this, and join us. It's been a really fun group to have going. We got a strong group already, but we'd love for more of you, hundreds if not thousands of you, to join us on our Locked On Cougars Insider Group and be a big part of the future of this podcast. All right, first question, we're going to go to Bryce today, and he asked about the Jay Hill contention. Let me back up on that. He's talking about the Blake Anderson situation at Utah State and if Jay Hill might be in the mix to go up there to Logan. Now, if you've been hiding under a rock and missed the news yesterday, Blake Anderson, Utah State football coach, has been placed on administrative leave as the university intends to fire him. They intend to not pay him out. What his buyout is. It's related to Title IX and sexual assault / domestic violence reporting. It's ugly scenes. I'm not going to delve into it all that deeply, but it was a great question here from Bryce. Said that talking about Hans Olsen, who I work with on a daily basis at the KSL Sports Zone, thought that Jay Hill should be a name at the top of Utah State's list. Do you think there's any mutual interest? If he did leave, who would be at the top of BYU's list? And will they be able to have a major hire a la Kevin Young's assistants? I think Jay Hill would absolutely be on the short list for Utah State to hire him, but I don't think they're going to hire anybody before the season begins. It's going to be something where Nate Dreiling, who's their new defensive coordinator, he's been installed as the interim head coach for the upcoming season at Utah State. They're in for a world of hurt at Utah State because interim coaching stuff and the way that this has all gone down, it's going to be a tough sledding for Utah State. But when it comes to hiring a new coach at Utah State, I think Utah State would be dumb not to interview Jay Hill and pursue him as much as possible. Will he ultimately want to go to Logan? That he can only answer that question. But the other thing Bryce asked here is, would Anderson, speaking of Gary Anderson, be an option to replace him? Speaking as BYU's defensive coordinator, or would Anderson follow him to Utah State? I can say with fairly good authority that Gary Anderson will never coach Utah State ever again. I just leave it at that. But him as a replacement for Jay Hill, potentially as BYU's defensive coordinator, I think that could be interesting. And he also says this, or is this all this too early and speculative? Because sorry, I just love what Coach Hill is doing. You're not alone. Coach Hill is absolutely killing it. And BYU needs to keep him on staff, if at all possible. You probably will have to pony up and pay him some extra money in terms of a new contract if you really want to keep him around the BYU football program. But I can tell you that Jay Hill is a home run hire, and to be a home run hire at Utah State. He'd be a home run hire to go to a number of other programs. And quite frankly, I'm excited that BYU's be able to hold on to him as long as they have at this point. Now, is he ultimately looking to jump from BYU directly to being a Power 5 or now a Power 4 head coach? That's a great question. But if he feels like he needs to become a head coach again at the FBS level, making the leap to Logan and rebuilding things there with Utah State wouldn't be a bad place to go for him. So we'll see what happens. But a number of you have asked some questions about this. Donovan Gillies, a good possibility Utah State football will have a good pipeline of players coming to BYU via the transfer portal. There's also a couple other questions here. Let's see. Josh Glenn, should BYU pursue anybody out of Utah State should they enter the transfer portal? There's a number of guys that BYU should look at. Jalen Royals, a star wide receiver. Now, does he ultimately decide to stick at Utah State where he's been a star? Probably. But Ike Larson, who's kind of the heart and soul of that defense, I will assure you, and I don't have inside knowledge of this, but I'm just speculating myself, but knowing what I know of BYU staff, they know of guys at Utah State that they'd say, okay, if that guy has an interest in leaving, he ultimately enters the transfer portal because to clear up maybe some confusion here, with the impending firing / Utah State letting go of Blake Anderson, there's going to be a 30-day window opening up for Utah State football players to enter the transfer portal if they so desire. Now, how many of them will take them up on that offer at this time of the year, considering training camp is literally mere weeks off and the season is not too far beyond that? TBD. But if there are guys that BYU is interested in and there's a talented player or two that Utah State has entered the transfer portal, BYU would be dumb not to chase them, quite frankly. So we'll see what happens. I'm very excited to see. Weston also asked that which players from USU would be good pickups. There's a number of guys, like I said, Jalen Royals, Ike Larson. They've got a couple of running backs, I think, that are fairly talented. So if any and all those guys come available, then I think you start seeing BYU look at their options on that. Great question from Taylor Dallin here. How do you feel about the defensive line and their performance this year? It's got to improve. We just talked about Tyler Batty. If he really can lead the resurgent defensive line this year for BYU, that would go a long way towards market improvement for the defense across the board. Last year, too often, BYU got run over by opposing rushing attacks. And they got guys out there in the Big 12 that are very, very good running backs. They got very good offensive linemen in front of them. BYU got to be able to hold up against the physical nature of the Big 12 rushing attacks. And if they're not able to do that, it's going to be another long season. So the defensive line's got to perform better, and I expect them to perform better because I don't think Jay Hill, Sione Puha, or Kelly Papinga, who have all got a role on that defensive front, they will not be content with BYU playing like they did a year ago. So I've got to expect at least some improvement on that front. Also, other questions here. Great question from Andy Stalling. Says, I don't know if I answered this or not. I texted a couple of weeks ago, but as the teams currently stand, who do you think would win against Mark Pope's Kentucky team or Kevin Young's BYU squad? Okay, right now, and I'm trying to stay unbiased on this, I think that Kevin Young's team would win. I think Mark Pope knows what he left at BYU, and he's got obviously big talent at Kentucky. But I think right now, if you look at these two squads, I think BYU probably the more cohesive unit and probably wins today. Now, 6 months from now, that's a great question. But I think right now, KYU would beat UK in a matchup there. All right, other questions here. Dennis asked this basketball question: any European travel exhibition games on the schedule similar to last summer? No, because the NCAA rules stipulate, Dennis, that you can only make those trips once every 4 years. So BYU made a trip last year, so it won't be until ostensibly the third year of Kevin Young's tenure that they will go on another international tour. I frankly would have, if you could trade last year's international tour for this year, just considering the continuity factor and having a new coach, probably would have been nice to have that tour this year, but they just will not have that right now. All right, other questions coming in here. I look at a great question here. Okay, we're going to get to a good one here on the professional front here in a moment. But Riker Wright, who do you see making the biggest leap this year on the team? I think you're talking about football here, Riker. But on the football team, biggest leap? That's a good question. Is Keanu Hill as a super senior at tight end able to make a big leap? Maybe. I would have him in that mix. I think you also look at some of the defensive players, the young players out there. Ace Kafusi, for example, is a guy that BYU's been very excited about at linebacker. Can he emerge and really establish himself this year? Similar to Isaiah Glasker. I heard really, really rave reviews about Isaiah Glasker throughout training camp last year. Then he injured his neck and was essentially shut down for the entire season. So some of these young players, you need to have them step up. Can a guy like Marcus McKenzie get back from that foot injury that cost him a large chunk of last season? Can he emerge as BYU's opposite cornerback, opposite, obviously, Jacob Robinson, and establish himself as a future star for BYU at that position? I think guys like that would be nice to have take a leap. I think also if you look at offense, LJ Martin, you like to have a guy like that step up and really take a step forward. Now, we'll see because they've got to go out there and stay healthy. They got to be able to prove themselves game in and game out, literally practice by practice. But those are some of the guys I'm looking at, and I'm going to be tracking a little bit. I also would like to see some offensive linemen start to emerge as well and really establish that the future of the BYU offensive line may not be as dire as guys like Connor Pay, Caleb Etienne, Braden Kime, et cetera, move on from their BYU days as well. So that's one to pay attention to there. Nick Chadwick, what two recruits will be the highest rated players on the football team to sign this cycle? If you believe some of the reports out there, BYU's got some players that if they have big senior seasons upcoming, they could see a major uptick in terms of their overall recruiting rankings, and that could ultimately land them as the highest rated players. I think of a guy like Tyler Payne, for example. Tyler is just an emerging force in the Utah prep ranks at linebacker. BYU got a major still when they got him to commit when he did. He's a BYU legacy, obviously, with his dad and uncle having played for the Cougars, but I think he is going to really be a fine player. And the other guy I'd be paying attention to is Waller, the wide receiver. And that's the other thing about this is he's a 4-star talent. And you have guys like that come into this program. You want them to succeed on the field, but the hype that they bring in with some of the higher recruiting rankings, that's a big deal in and of itself. So keep an eye on those. But I always add the caveat that it's subject to change. It really is, because a lot of stuff can change really quickly on that front. Gage asked this: what are the expectations for Kevin Young? What do you think the Cougars' record will be this upcoming season in the Big 12? Expectations are to finish in the top half of the Big 12. I think that's the expectation for Kevin Young in his first year at the helm of the BYU basketball program. They finished 5th last year. Could you slide to maybe 6th or 7th this year and still have a very good season? Yes, you could. And that would still be top half, as I mentioned, of the conference, but there's no backsliding right now. The way that Kevin Young is recruited for this program, has put a roster together, and the hype and substance he's brought to BYU basketball, I think there's a lot of expectation on the record this year. 6th or 7th in the league can find you what they're going to play 20 games, 12-8. And that 12-8 could be very impressive, because the Big 12 is going to be super competitive, and it's even more competitive this year if you believe some of the metrics of a bounce back season than it was a year ago, and it was pretty hyper competitive last year. So very interested to see how BYU holds up with that. Another good question here comes in from Jake, by the way. He says, thoughts on the new lights at LAS? Love them. I should answer that one. I answered that earlier, but a question for the mailbag. Do you agree that what Jay Hill said the other day, that Utah is going to be super surprised by the physicality of the Big 12 and maybe out physicaled in some games? Well, let's just put it this way. The last time BYU beat Utah, remember that famous game, Kyle Whittingham, and I can tell you what I know of Kyle Whittingham is he is reticent to give credit to BYU in any way, shape, or form, no matter what it is. But he went into that post-game press conference and says, we got out-physicaled in this game. BYU is not maybe considered to be a top-tier physical team in the Big 12. They are a physical team, but Kansas State, some of these teams in the Big 12 are very physical, and Utah's going to have to hold up against that, because the reputation of the Big 12 for a long time was they were a finesse league similar to the Pac-12, but in the last 3 to 4 years, they've really morphed into a pretty hard-nosed conference, and you're going to have to hold up against that if you're Utah, if you want to win the conference as you're projected to do. We'll see, but I believe that they will be surprised just with some of the differences that the Pac-12 had that maybe they didn't anticipate as they make the transition to the Big 12. But yeah, they're going to have to hold up physically against some of these teams. It's going to be very interesting, once again, to see how they manage all the expectations. There's a lot being heaped upon them. There are people thinking that they're locked to play in the college football playoff. Well, you got to go out and prove that. You got to be able to go do it on the field. And we'll see if the Utes can pull through on that, or if a program like BYU could upend them along the way as well. All right, a couple other questions here before we go. John Solomon, what will the state of Utah get first? The Larry O'Brien Trophy or the Stanley Cup? I'll be honest, John, I'm expecting if either of those things are going to come to not to BYU, to Utah, the state of Utah, I would say it's a Stanley Cup before the Larry O'Brien Trophy, simply because if you look at what the Utah Hockey Club has right now roster-wise versus the Utah Jazz, I think that they are way ahead in their timeline of a rebuild than the Utah Jazz are. Now, that can be jump-started with just a couple of trades when it comes to the NBA, but I think the Stanley Cup is the more likely to reside in Utah before the Larry O'Brien Trophy, if either ever do. Other questions here. What's the fastest animal on Earth? Ian asked that question. Now, Ian, are you trying to trick me here? Because are you talking like land animal? Because that's the cheetah, because they can hit a top speed of like 70 some odd miles. If I recall my era of watching nature on PBS growing up, but there are some fish out there in the ocean. I think what is this, like sailfish or some tuna that can hit some incredible speeds as well. I almost feel like this is a trick question, and I'm not picking up on the joke here, but those are what I'm going to project. But there's some really, really fast creatures out there in the world, and we think we're fast as human beings, but we pale in comparison to a number of other species when it comes to that. All right. So there you go. I think that is all the questions I've got here today. So if I did not answer your question, I think a lot of them are similar, because I think Josh, you asked about players from USU. Weston asked about players from USU. So I think I got to all of them that weren't doubled up or were repeats. But regardless, a big thank you as always for your support of the podcast. Want to encourage you guys to have a great Independence Day, celebrating the 4th of July tomorrow. Obviously, the beginning of the birth of our nation, speaking of the United States of America. So enjoy the holiday. Like I said, my schedule on Friday is a little bit screwy, so this may be the final one for the week. Well, I'm going to say it right now. It's probably going to be the final one of the week. Anticipate it being the final one this week, and we'll get back after it on Monday. But hey, let's say something crazy happens. I am not immune or not adverse. That's why I'm not averse to recording another podcast for Friday, but we definitely are going to take the holiday tomorrow, take the day off, allow everybody to go out and have a barbecue, light us some fireworks. Don't blow any appendages off while you're doing that, but have some fun. And if we reconvene on Friday, reconvene on Monday, or anytime in between, a big thank you as always for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. And thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.